Challenge accepted. The Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge is back, and will you accept the challenge of getting your first taste of Fantasy Major League Rugby? We also have a special guest who joins this week's show, Alistair Kirsch-Poole, the mastermind behind our website, thefantasyruckers.com, talks about his journey this season, and of course, we look back at the playoff matchups that were, and look ahead to the conference championship matchups that are to come this weekend. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 71 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And we got an exciting show for you on this edition of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. I'm Ryan Yee. With me, as always, Matt Yee, Devin Vanderpool on a little bit of a vacation post-fantasy Major League Rugby
vacation
season.
For what, Ryan? This guy gets a vacation for finishing 6th or 7th in our league.
That's true. I mean, it's the mental recovery that he needs after the long, grueling 17-week fantasy Major League Rugby season. He's got to take a little time away. It's been a lot for that guy. He's been learning a lot. He's been taking big steps.
Little steps.
Little steps. I mean, he's done okay. Just missed
6.
That's true. But there were 10 guys in this league this year. But nonetheless, we're proud of him. He did a good job this season. He deserves the vacation. Matt, we were off last week, though, and you're back from your vacation.
Yeah.
And now, how's it feel? I mean, you're now, I guess, over 1 week removed from the big-time championship victory that you were able to get over Rugby Morning's John Fitzpatrick. Does it still feel just as sweet to be crowned the champion right now, having your name getting put on very, very shortly on this Fantasy Ruckers League Championship jersey, and of course, getting that $100 donation, which has been submitted to Iroquois Roots Rugby, and they're greatly appreciative of speaking with them on social media about it. They were very honored for that, and we're so happy that we can contribute to that. How sweet does it feel over 1 week removed?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll start with, look, it was sweet to be able to donate to Iroquois Roots Rugby, and you know what? I came back from Disney World, had a great time there. I took a chance to kind of stand on top of Splash or Space Mountain, whatever it's called, and just, raise my hands in the air and made sure everybody there knew that I was the Fantasy Ruckers League champion. So, yeah, it was a great trip. Now I'm back to the grind. I had to make sure that I caught the MLR playoffs because we got a big thing coming up, and I got to win that too.
Oh, there we go. A little bit of a teaser towards that. But yeah, how many people showed up to your fantasy championship parade?
It was just me. It was just me walking down. Nobody even knew what I was doing. I was just sitting there, spraying champagne everywhere and cracking open beer cans and people were just looking at me weird. I didn't understand why, because I was the champion of the world.
Maybe that's why we couldn't find you, because you got charged with indecency because there are a whole bunch of kids around at Disney
I think
World,
they were being indecent because they showed no respect to the guy who just spent the last 17 weeks trying to win a championship.
How could they? Absolutely
Exactly. They do it for the NFL teams. So
yeah, right? Fantasy Ruckers champion, just as prestigious.
What a joke, Ryan. But hey, it's good to be back.
It is good to be back. And like I said, got a jam-packed episode in this one. We got a very special guest. And this one's a big one. He's been wanting to come on this show for quite some time. He is a legend. I think he has officially etched his name in the Fantasy MLR legendary books. And
on the jersey, you should actually put his name on the back, as like, if the same way they do it
after a season that we had, he might just deserve it, because that guy's name is Alistair Kirsch-Poole, and if you don't know, he is the brains behind the FantasyRuckers.com that took Fantasy MLR to a whole nother level this season. It was a whole whole bunch of impact that he made, whether it was from the fantasy manager experience, whether it was really saving a whole bunch of time on my end as well, moving from the hand Excel sheets that I had last season to what we had this year. Just incredible. So he's joining the show in this in this one to talk about the website. He's a big time Old Glory DC fan, so obviously we had to break down that big time win of Old Glory DC over the New York Ironworkers this past weekend in the first round of the Major League Rugby playoffs. So we're going to have all that. And again, we're obviously going to break down the Seattle Seawolves Houston Sabercats matchup and talk a little bit about this challenge that we had. If you were following us last season, we had it last year and it's coming back. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, preview the matches for this upcoming conference championship finals that are happening this weekend, which is obviously going to include the playoff challenge that we have coming. So let's get into it, Matt. Let's talk a little bit of news and notes.
Well, Ryan, you got to get to the housekeeping items.
Housekeeping items.
Housekeeping items. You can tell people to join the Discord. You got to tell people to follow, subscribe.
Right. We've been 1 week away.
What the heck are you doing? Were you in Disney World getting drunk? What's going on here?
We've been 1 week away, and I didn't do our plug. That's right. Matt said it all. If you aren't already, at thefantasyruckers.com or at thefantasyruckers, check it out on the handles above on the YouTube page. You can find it below in the description. This one's going to be an important one because wheels are turning for us to make fantasy MLR reality, and you'll be wanting to follow all that because there are some big stuff happening soon over the course of this offseason heading into the 2024 season, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, you want to do that. And if that's not enough for you, make sure you join our Discord channel. It's been a whole bunch of fun interacting with the community, especially during these playoffs time, chatting about the playoffs, chatting about some controversial calls, all there. If you love MLR, that's the place you want to be because there's a whole bunch of other people that love Major League Rugby there as well. And if that's not enough for you, check out that website that Alistair Kirsch-Poole has put together, thefantasyruckers.com. Even if you're not a fantasy guy, a whole bunch of stats up there. You can take a look back at our Fantasy Ruckers League season. Had a whole lot of fun kind of using that as a very big tool for not only just Major League Rugby purposes, but obviously fantasy purposes as well. But all right, now let's get into a little bit of news and notes. Again, I'm messing up.
You're all over the place, man. This isn't even the Commissioner League update. You just wanted me to hear this thing because you know I hate it, and you wanted to bring me down from my high, and you just played the stupid trumpets as we're going into the news and notes. But hey, if you want to do a Commissioner League update, Ryan, let's update the people. Who won the championship? Who's at the top of the table? Who did I beat?
You already took it. We don't need to go over that. I can't believe I opened that.
Oh, you wanted to go through it again.
You know what? Let's do that. Let's go through a Commissioner League's Yeez League update, and it's not going to be our Fantasy Ruckers League update, but it's going to be a little bit of an update that we have.
They got a similarity to it.
They do have a little bit.
That one too.
Oh my gosh! All right, there is going to be a little bit of opportunity for not only our Fantasy Ruckers League members to join, but anyone out there that wants to get a little taste of Fantasy Major League Rugby, because the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge has returned for the Conference Championship Finals and for the Championship Finals. And it's going to be back. We're going to break down all the details here for you. It's going to be a lot of fun. We, like we said, last year was a whole bunch of fun. Had a ton of people join that were outside of the Fantasy Ruckers League. It was cool to see a lot of people coming in and getting their first taste of Fantasy Major League Rugby. And hey, some of them even joined after playing the Fantasy Ruckers League Playoff Challenge, joined the league this year. Rugby Wrap-Up joined. They were a part of the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge last year. I believe James Dealey's MLR Stats was also part of the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. He was part of our league. So, it's like baby steps getting into this whole fantasy MLR thing, and this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge is a big one. Where do we begin, Matt? I guess how this whole thing works if you didn't play it last year?
Yeah, maybe that's a good place to start.
All right. Well, this is how it's all going to break down. All right, so you're essentially going to be choosing 5 different roster positions. You're going to be choosing a front row player, a second row or back row player, a scrum half or fly half, a center or back 3, and a set piece position. Those are 5 different positions. Front row is 1, second row, back row, 2nd, scrum half, fly half, 3rd, center, back 3 as your 4th, and then a set piece as your 5th. And this point scoring, a little bit different from last year. In a way, it's mirroring our Fantasy Ruckers League, but obviously we had a big change in the Fantasy Ruckers League this season. So this Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge is going to include obviously a big change too. We're having the same point system. So meters gain is introduced, tackles is introduced, all that good stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how that has an impact. And this is where the challenge comes into play. If you're planning on making a roster squad, you got a $15 budget to fill out those 5 positions. And those budgets will be varied, or the budgets for certain players will be varied based on the point totals that they scored throughout the 2023 Fantasy MLR season. So, for example, Nate Oxberger, one of the best center back 3 players in all of Major League Rugby. He's going to be worth $5. And you look at certain players there, he'll be up there with obviously San Diego playing. Another like Lion Afuti is up there in $5 range. So you want to break it down, and we're going to talk about certain strategies once we get into the breakdown of these upcoming matches. But it's going to be interesting how league managers are going to approach filling out this $15 budget with these 5 different positions, with players ranging from $5 all the way to $1.
Yeah, I mean, it was a time last year. It was strategic. You had to figure it out. I think another element of this is that we've got 4 of the top teams in the league remaining, and you're going to really have to choose where you want to spend your money, how you want to spend that budget, on what position you're going to really go spending. Are you going to go mediocre for everyone? It'll be interesting to see, and it's always kind of fun to see how you size up against other people's thoughts and who they think are going to be the best players in the playoffs.
It is true. And I think a quick thing to add that I think is going to be a huge, interesting difference to see from last year's playoff challenge to this year's playoff challenge is I think last year there was a huge emphasis on picking a fly half that was going to kick points, that was going to get a solid stuff there moving forward. But I think this year, with the addition of tackles, with the addition of meters gained, you're going to see some explosions from that center position. How are you going to choose between a center, between a back 3? It's going to be an interesting one. Are you going to rely on those explosive tries? You're going to rely on those consistent meters. Going to be interesting to see in that standpoint there. So for those of you that want to join, have a look out on our social media channels like we just talked about. We will be posting a spreadsheet link that everyone will have access to that will include all the values from those players that you'll be able to build your lineups. And the way that you're going to submit these lineups to us is through Twitter. You're going to send us a message, or you're going to tweet at us at the Fantasy Ruckers. Use the hashtag, the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. It's a big one. And include your lineup: front row, second row, back row, scrum half, fly half, center back 3, and set piece. Let's get this thing buzzing. Let's get a whole bunch of people joining us. Let's shorten it a little bit, Matt. Let's call it the TFR Playoff Challenge.
Hashtag TFR Playoff Challenge. Yeah, Twitter's got those characters, unless you got Twitter Blue.
That's true.
You only have so much space.
We've
got some long names in this league. So.
That is true. So use hashtag TFR Playoff Challenge. Send us your lineup. $15 budget. Fill out those 5 positions. Again, we'll send out the details in our Discord channel. We'll tweet out the spreadsheet link with some more details there as well. And we're excited to see how many different lineups that we do get incoming here to play that. Again, all of the points will be tallied, will be announced, and we'll keep everyone updated with how the playoff challenge is going. Did I cover everything there? We'll get into a little bit more of it. We'll talk to Alistair about it, and obviously we'll talk about it when we get to the games. But I think that's a good little teaser for the people here.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I mean, I'm kind of thinking maybe we should go hashtag TFR MLR Playoff Challenge. Hashtag TFR MLR Playoff Challenge, just so the people know that what we're talking about is the MLR Playoff Challenge, and it's the TFR MLR Playoff Challenge.
That is true. That is true. Is that what we're going with?
Let's go with that one. We're closing. Forget the last 2 hashtags that we said. You're going to tweet the lineup at the Fantasy Ruckers and use the hashtag TFR MLR Playoff Challenge.
All right, got it. Hashtag TFR MLR Playoff Challenge. Send us your lineup through there. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. We're excited. I finally get to play a little bit of fantasy. This is my favorite time of the year because now I get to step back from the commissioner role.
Too,
I did stink at it. It was a tough one. And
why he's the commissioner.
That is why I'm the commissioner. Don't play this. I just get to watch all you suffer instead of having to go through my suffering himself. So, yeah, true. All right. Well, let's get into some news and notes. So again, stay up to date there with all of our social channels and our Discord there, and you'll get all the information you'll need to join the TFR MLR playoff challenge. All right, let's get into the news and notes here. Again, we're in the middle of playoffs. Not much to talk about, but I think the biggest thing that we need to mention is it's always nice giving back to the community. We just did so. You just did so, choosing the Iroquois Roots Rugby and donating that generous $100 donation to Iroquois Roots Rugby, who very appreciative, and we're very happy to be able to contribute to such a great cause. And some other guys that are doing some pretty good stuff in their community as well, being honored here by Major League Rugby with the S. Marcus Callaway Community Impact Award. 4 players as finalists here for it. Olive Khalifi of Utah Warriors, Mikey Teo of the San Diego Legion, Dan Creel of the Seattle Seawolves, and hey, friend of the show, Old Glory DC's Callie Martinez on the list as
Unreal.
well.
I mean, I'm not surprised. The guy, I think he was talking on the weekend at the game while he was on the bench, just saying, the fact that he was, his work in kind of putting out fires in those forest fires in Canada. We know it's been pretty big here, and he's been really contributing to the cause however he can from DC. So unreal to see. These guys are, legends on the field and also legends off the field. So it's great that these guys are being rewarded and kind of being recognized for their work. And it just shows, MLR not only has great players, also great guys.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Go check out on Major League Rugby's website. They go into detail with all what these guys have done for the community. It's really cool stuff. Obviously, I think that's been a big part of rugby, especially Matt, through the time that we've been playing in our playing days. Just how important it is for the rugby community to give back to the communities that they play in. Is really important stuff, which is one of the reasons why we absolutely love this sport, and it's been fantastic. So make sure you do go check that out. The only other news and note that I guess has a little bit more of an implication when it comes to what we're going to be seeing this weekend. But hey, red card, Blair Cowan in his in the incident that he had on the field. He's gonna be suspended 4 weeks. Means he won't be there for the for the Major League Rugby Championship final if San Diego wins this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if there was a team for it to happen to, it was San Diego or New England. Both these guys have incredible back row depth. I mean, they've got Poitevin coming back. They've got Mike Smith back. They've got Afungia. They got Tamalo. Yeah, they're losing a great veteran presence of Blair Cowan, but I don't think they're missing too much. They've still got depth to cover.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to get into a preview of those games, and we're also going to get into a breakdown of both the Old Glory DC Rugby New York matchup over the past weekend, which was a nail-biter, and obviously the Seattle Seawolves and Houston SaberCats matchup. But before that, it's time to bring on our very special guest, Alistair Kirsch-Poole. And it is now time to welcome in a guy that we've been wanting to have on this show for quite some time, the mastermind behind our website, thefantasyruckers.com. I got to say, a guy that has added a few more hours in my weekly work life because I don't have to spend as much time as I did last season punching in all these stats, has definitely consolidated the process for me and has made it a whole lot more feasible for me. A guy that has pushed fantasy MLR in a direction that is going to take huge steps moving forward. But Alistair Kirsch-Poole, the genius behind thefantasyruckers.com, welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show finally.
Thanks for having me. I finally get to be on.
Yeah,
we had to get the big brains of the whole program on at some point. What a better way to have you on at the end of the season. But I got to get something out of the way. Before we get into this interview, we got to get something out of the way. I was watching the game on the weekend, right? And we're going to talk more about the Old Glory DC and Rugby New York game. But I swear, and I didn't say this pre-show on purpose, but I swear I saw you on the broadcast wearing sporting Old Glory. They're showing that supporting section a lot. And I swear I saw it come up and I was like, I swear I've seen that face before. And when you told me that you're at the game, I was like, I'm putting 2 dots together. I knew I saw you on the broadcast. Unreal. Old Glory DC supporters. I mean, they go the distance.
Yep. I was there. I was on the fan bus. Took us a while to get there. New Jersey traffic is, terrible.
It's something, right? It's something.
I mean, we got great views in the New York skyline as we're stuck on a bridge for like an hour. So
There you go. Really milking all the time that you could get in New York. But yeah, we're gonna talk about it all. Obviously, we're gonna talk about the website and talk about the journey it's been. Obviously, if you've been listening and following the Fantasy Ruckers League since the beginnings, I mean the steps that we've taken from our inaugural season to even this season has been tenfold. And again, I cannot emphasize enough how much time, Alistair, this website has saved on my end of things, really allowing me to live, I guess, a more healthier lifestyle. I would say maybe not so much drawing and bogged down by a whole bunch of fantasy numbers, but it was a lot of fun. So we're gonna talk about that website, talk about the journey it was for there. Obviously, got to talk about especially since you're there, and we know how big of an Old Glory DC fan you are. Talk about that match over the weekend, which was a nail biter. But what a finish by Old Glory DC. And then we mentioned earlier in the show, we got a little something that we did last year, which we're going to continue here for the conference finals and the championship finals, is the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. We're going to get a little bit of input for you there, and of course, maybe get a tiny, so get this in your mind, maybe a tiny prediction for you with that big matchup between Old Glory DC and the New England Free Jacks coming up this weekend. So you'll have a little bit of time to think about it. But let's start right off the top, and let's talk about this website, man, because obviously you and I had been discussing this for quite some time, and it was a little bit of a fast-tracked off-season. By the time you and I got things rolling here and really started getting the communication going, we didn't have much time ahead of the season, so it was really crunch work for you to get that all put together, which miraculously you did. I have no idea how you did it, but I mean, all your hard work going into it. So I guess let's kind of take it by a timeline stage. At that beginning stages, as you're going through it, did it ever come in your head where you're like, holy crap, what did I just do? What did I just sign up for? This was something huge. Or I guess, how was that process? Was it fun putting this together? What was it like putting together the fantasyruckers.com at the beginning?
Yeah, well, websites are sort of my wheelhouse. I'm a web designer by day, so I always, that's whenever I see a problem, I always think, I can fix this with a website. And so I saw what you were doing last year, and I thought, man, he probably is just fixing this with a spreadsheet. This is probably just an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. And I was like, I could probably do that better. And I was sort of toying with the idea for a while, ever since you guys started this. And then we connected in the off season, and then I was at my parents' house over the holidays, and then I got back from that, and I put in the work to make it happen. It was very quick to put together that website. It's for any coders or anyone who knows about web design in the background. It's basically just a bunch of PHP and a SQL database. It's not fancy at all, but it does the job.
If it wasn't obvious already, obviously I'm not a web designer by day. So you're exactly right there. It was definitely all spreadsheets last season, and the fact that you say how easy it was for you kind of puts in my mind, holy crap, maybe I got to start figuring some stuff out. But nonetheless, though, that's it. Yeah, you with what you were able to do and what you were able to put together in that time, it absolutely did save a whole bunch of time on my end, like I've said multiple times, because you're gonna hear it a whole bunch, because yeah, you've made a huge impact on my lifestyle, that's for sure. It's coming from last season. But yeah, then I guess let's talk about kind of your interaction with it. How was it? I mean, you and I were talking about the rules and talking about what we wanted implemented, the framework, kind of the workflow, and all these things. How was it like going through that process? I know before you weren't necessarily that in tune with, I guess, fantasy sports as a whole, but after learning the process, kind of what was it like for you to kind of merge the two things that you love? Obviously, you love Major League Rugby. Obviously, you love Old Glory DC, and then getting to merge that kind of with your web design day-by-day trade. How was that for you to kind of do something like that?
It's an interesting challenge, because I've never done any fantasy sports of any kind. So I was coming into this completely blind, and so I know there were a bunch of times where I had to ask you really basic questions about how all of this worked. And thank you for answering all of those, because
there you go.
Sort of, I've got the web knowledge, and I've got the sports knowledge. I don't have the fantasy knowledge.
Well, that's why it's a perfect relationship, Alistair. I got the fantasy knowledge to bring to the table, and you got the web design knowledge. It's a perfect pairing. We can keep this thing rolling. It's great.
Complementary.
We're
complementary skill sets here. Yeah. And so it was putting it together. I mean, it came together quickly, and part of what what got missed there is just the testing. So thank you to all the Major League Rugby or the Fantasy Ruckers participants who dealt with all of the bugs and the things going wrong early on. I think we mostly got those ironed out by the end, but it was a journey, and it's fun to dive into something that I didn't really have much knowledge of, but I knew I could fix it. I knew I could help, and so it's fun to give it a try. And I'm excited to take it forward next year. I think I've learned so much from this experience, and so much that we can do differently and better next year. And I'm really looking forward to pretty much tearing down the whole thing and rebuilding it from scratch.
I mean, you definitely made life easier for us, and you definitely made the product better. And look, I was happy to be one of the test dummies, to be able to be playing with the website, bother you with some issues that I was having with it, but there weren't many. For something that you put together, I must say it felt like quite the nice and finished product. And the fact that it's only going to get better from here is just unreal to sound. I was going to ask, I mean, it's not more of a question, but more of a compliment to you, coming from a champion of the league,
Oh my gosh.
my name on the jersey. I have to ask, how does it feel to be the true people's champion of the Fantasy Ruckers League? Because I mean, people have to know, and people need to understand just the amount of questions we're firing on the Discord channel, the amount of times that you kind of came in and fixed something within like an hour of somebody posting it in the middle of the day on a Wednesday. It was just ridiculous the way that you were able to just troubleshoot things and fix things. And I just have to say, and I had to tell you while you're on that, man, you've been the champion, the true champion this season, because this season would not have been as enjoyable without the work that you did and the work that you put in.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be helpful. I mean, that's really all I'm trying to achieve.
I love it. And I mean, I will say, right? I think Alistair, you and I kind of were on the same page heading into this season, that this was going to be a huge learning experience for us. And I think, Matt, to your point about how we really were able to use the Fantasy Ruckers League as kind of a guinea pig type kind of scenario where we can experiment with things, see how things work, get your guys' reaction, get your guys' feedback on certain things, which we'll especially continue to do during this off season, as Alistair, you and I work together to improve this thing and get it to as good of a point, if not better than what we want it to be. But I think it was a huge learning experience for me, just to add to what you were saying, Alistair. And I think just understanding the nuances and even coming from a fantasy guy, right? Obviously, your learning experience, at least compared to my learning experience, I think came from two different perspectives, right? Like your learning experiences with the website and the design and the technical stuff and a lot of the things that are happening behind the scenes that a lot of us don't even understand. But for me, at least, the learning experience came with a lot of the fantasy nuances that you wouldn't think as just an average fantasy player that you'd have to think about. But I guess let's take commissioner to an extra level. Let's put it on steroids and have you think about a whole bunch of things, how waivers are supposed to work, timing, certain things like that, which then affects how you kind of do your job and how you're able to code all the things. I think it was kind of a synergy between you and I that we were kind of learning together through different lenses, which was pretty funny, and it made for a very interesting second season for this year. But I will also add, though, and I don't know how much of an impact for you, Alistair, that you really saw with this, but I think you could really tell that for our league members, the experience as a whole, because of the website, increased tenfold without a question. Whether that became from them having a more stranglehold, and Matt, you can kind of chime in here if you'd like about your experience, but getting a stranglehold and having that feeling of owning your own fantasy team. You know what I mean? That's what the fantasy website provided. Last year, people were sending me their lineups. I had it in a spreadsheet. No one could really control their own lineups or control their own pickups. Everything had to kind of get processed through me, which then I did on an Excel sheet. But this website allowed people to take that control, which I think is what fantasy is all about, right? You want to have that fantasy ownership of a quote unquote team that you think you own. And I think on top of that, being able to then get the stats that we were able to get and implement that and get that point scoring and allowing people to see those matchups in a space that they could access wherever they are, whether that's on a computer or on a phone. I think that added a whole nother level, I should say, to this fantasy experience in the second year.
Yeah, and that's the power of websites. Obviously, you can sort of
Yeah, the website's way better than Ryan. I gotta say, Ryan kind of, compared to the website, Ryan kind of stunk it up last year. But hey, that's good.
Sorry,
he did his best.
Is that why you lost last year?
Oh no. Yes. Do you know what? That's why I'm thanking you, Alistair, because you are the reason for this championship. And I'm sure you helped a little bit. I'm sure you were maybe happy to see Fitzy lose as well. So, yeah.
My glorious rugby podcast co-host, never.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think again, just a massive enhancement to the whole fantasy experience, which is what we're trying to do moving forward. And I think that alludes to kind of our final kind of talking point here about this website, Alistair, because the goal, obviously, we've been saying it here on the show ever since we began this thing, was that we're trying to make this a reality. We're trying to make fantasy MLR a real thing that everyone will have access to. And I think a big step into that was creating this website, going through this learning process, testing it with the dummies that we've had last season, and then obviously the ones that again coming back this year to then go through kind of a different process than what they had last year. And I think it's really opened up what you and I need to do, and especially from you from a technical standpoint, to make this thing really feasible so that anyone could be playing fantasy MLR, because that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, it is the goal. Next year, this off season, I'm going to be tearing everything down to the studs and rebuilding this whole experience so that we can open it up to everyone next year, because there's a bunch of things that I just sort of glossed over in the web design in the first go round. There were a bunch of, like, there's no way for any fantasy league commissioner to manage any of the teams. I mean, I was still building new admin tools for you, Ryan,
throughout the year
until the end there. And there's just so many of those experiences that need to be built out and need to be durable for anyone to join. Because this year, obviously, people had problems. They could just come over into the Discord and post them, and I could get to them. And there was only one league of people to complain and find issues. So next year, if we're opening it up to a bunch more people, there's only so many issues I'm going to be able to deal with.
There's so many Alistairs.
There's only one Alistair,
Yeah.
So,
I
mean,
would never make anyone else do
oddball.
that code.
There's only one oddball gentleman that can really do this stuff. But I mean, speaking to that note, Alistair, and as we're kind of wrapping up talking about the website here, is there? You kind of talked about how you want to tear it down, build it back up. Is there one feature that you've been kind of thinking about throughout the season, maybe after the season, that you're thinking, oh, that's something that I definitely want to add into the site and definitely add that functionality?
One thing I definitely want to improve, and something that would be relatively easy, is just the whole design of the site and the stats that are being put up there. Like when you click on a player's page, a player's profile, I want to have way more what were their stats last year? Where do they rank in terms of players on their team, players in their position, players overall, where a lot more graphics as well, because everything's just a number right now. It's all just in a table, and that's because that's very easy to do in the web. I would just stick it all on a table and it's good. But I really want to make it a more visually interesting experience and make it have a lot more information available to the fantasy managers, and make it more interactive, make it easier to sort by different factors, and really help people find that information more easily.
You're getting me excited over here
and
already.
I will say, I think that's a really, really good thing about the fantasyruckers.com too. Even if you're not necessarily that interested in playing fantasy MLR, the amount of information, even at the current state that the fantasyruckers.com website is at right now currently, there's a whole lot of information for the average MLR fan to go on there and just digest and really enhance that experience and get to know a lot of these numbers, and because a lot of it right now isn't really available, in many places. But you can go on the fantasyruckers.com, see how a player did, both from a fantasy perspective and from a statistical perspective, just from a rugby standpoint on our website. It's all easy laid out. To hear that it's going to get even better than that, Alistair, yeah, it's getting me excited as well. But yeah, I mean, that's the goal here. And like we said, the ultimate goal is to open this up to as many people as possible. Alistair and I will be working throughout the off season to get it to a point where we will be able to do that. And obviously, you'll want to stay tuned to our social media channels at the Fantasy Ruckers, where we'll make that announcement when that does hopefully become available in the near future. Last thing, Alistair, for you to wrap up this portion about the website, 2 quick kind of hitter questions. Okay, so first one, biggest challenge when it came to dealing with this whole fantasyruckers.com thing?
The biggest challenge is probably, I mean, we talked about it already, but just my understanding of fantasy sports wasn't there. And so there's a bunch of things that I probably didn't design in the correct way. When you're designing a site, you sort of have to lay the foundations at some point, and those foundational decisions you build up from there. And some of those foundations that I laid were not in the right place. It turned out that they weren't what I needed. And that's why I'm going to be rebuilding the whole thing, is because there were certain assumptions I made at the beginning which were not accurate. But so it's working around that and working around my knowledge of the domain to really make a good website. That'd be the biggest challenge.
And then thing you love the most about taking on this project?
I think it's just seeing something come to fruition and be useful for people. I mean, I enjoy coding. There's a reason that I love doing this for free and all of that. And I enjoy solving these sorts of problems, but for it to also be useful for growing something, it's not just for my own personal enjoyment. It's to help you out, help the fantasy managers out, and hopefully bring legit, real fantasy rugby to everyone who follows the MLR. That there's a lot of satisfaction there.
Well,
man of the people, a true man of the people.
Well, let me tell you, Alistair, you and I will be having a lot of time this off season to work together to do that. And again, I'm sure it excites you that instead of having a handful of weeks time before the start of the season to put something together, we're going to have an entire off season to work together to kind of do this. I'll be there for you for any of the fantasy stuff. You'll be there for me for any of the web stuff, and hopefully at the end this time, or I guess the start of next season, we'll have a product that is pretty cool for everyone to use. And then I guess the last question that I'll ask, and this is going to kind of allude us into our next topic here about the Fantasy Ruckers playoff challenges. Alistair, do you think you'd call yourself a tiny bit more of a fantasy expert than you would have called yourself maybe 4 or 5 months ago?
Oh, for sure. And just, I now know almost all of the players' names. If they're signed to a Major League Rugby team, I've probably seen their name at least once.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think the reason why I asked, again, is the Fantasy Ruckers playoff challenge. We asked you before you came on the show, is it something that you're going to be partaking in? And it sounds like we're getting the feeling that you might take a crack, and it's got to be feeling good that you actually get to take a crack at playing fantasy. And it's kind of the same feeling that I have being a commissioner all season long. I've seen all these guys have fun, and now finally I get to join in and have a little fun too with the fantasy world. Is that something that you're excited for?
Oh, absolutely. I'm definitely going to be participating.
Now the question
is, I'm not necessarily going to be good at it, because I'm going to take a lot with my head or a lot with my heart and not so much with my head.
Sure.
It'll be fun.
And that's obviously the biggest challenge when it comes to fantasy sports. I guess the over-under for Alistair, Matt, is how many Old Glory DC guys are going to be on that squad. I do remember, I believe, last season, I think 0. That's a lie. It's going to be all five.
That's already thinking with your head. You've already surpassed the heart.
That's true, but there's partly a reason for that, and partly it's because I know that my heart would get involved, but also because Old Glory is a team that has, I mean, when you look at their score sheets, it's every try is a different player, and you look at the stats, they're spread out. They're really a team rather than individual players. So I think there's better individual players on other teams.
The guy says he's not thinking with, he's gonna think with his heart, not his head. He's coming
He's
out with
all
some
brains,
he's
all
coming out
brains.
with some crazy fantasy analysis here. He's got some strategy going already. I don't know. That sounds like a pretty darn good fantasy expert to me, Alistair. I think this you learned a little
We'll
bit
see.
more than just a bit over the past 4 or 5 months when it comes to fantasy MLR. But that's exciting. Yeah. We're obviously gonna break down the games and some of these players, but it's exciting to hear that the brains behind the FantasyRuckers.com will be also taking part in the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. Really excited to hear that. But let's get into your boys. Let's get into this Old Glory DC team. Now let's get into a breakdown of this past weekend's games, and we'll obviously start with your favorite team, Old Glory DC, beating the most recent champions of Major League Rugby's, the former guys that were holding that shield. You've taken them down. Old Glory DC coming away with a big time 37-33 victory over the New York Ironworkers. Before we get into a breakdown of it, Alistair, how does it feel? It was a tight one. How stressed were you? It was a lot of fun watching that match over the weekend on Sunday.
Oh yeah, a ton of fun, and it, like you say, came down to the wire. It was a real instant classic from a watching perspective, and like I said, I went to the game. It was a lot of fun to be there. It's actually a surprisingly nice stadium. Having only seen it on TV, going there in person, it's actually nicer than it seems. Maybe it's just because I'm comparing it to Segra Field, which is not the world's nicest stadium. Yeah, ton of fun. Great group of Old Glory fans that traveled down. We made ourselves heard. We were pretty loud.
That's for sure.
There were times where I forgot that it wasn't a home game for Old Glory because I think we were making more noise than New York fans were. And yeah, it was touch and go for a moment there, and definitely there were moments where I thought, "Ooh, we might lose this," but he came through. I think they proved they were a better team.
Yeah. You know what? And that's what I heard. When I was reading up, everybody was saying how it seemed like Old Glory DC supporters were making. It seemed like it was their stadium. You know, Old Glory DC supporters were there. They're making the noise. The New York supporters just, you know, they couldn't keep up with you guys, Alistair. They couldn't keep up. But to the game, I mean, for me, and where you are probably sweating, you know, at the field is at the end of the first half when Old Glory DC got the double yellow cards. New York gets a try at the end of the half, and I said, we're going into half, and I said, look, if New York scores coming out of the half with that one yellow card still on the table, or I think it was two coming out of the halftime. I said, look, if New York scores again, game's done. But the Old Glory DC team, I mean, they stuck with it with two yellow cards, with one yellow card, and they end up winning out that with a penalty. And I was looking, I said, Old Glory DC looks like they are sticking in this. The fact that they made it through that just shows how good of a team they were that day. And yeah, I can imagine you're probably sweating when you saw those two yellow cards in a row.
Yeah. Well, I was definitely a little annoyed with Federico and Selmy for that. I think he was very quick to the yellow cards in this game, but I mean, New York got their own double yellow later, so I guess it all evens out in the end.
It almost felt like after that New York try was allowed in. I mean, we can talk more about that ridiculous TMO call. Absolutely ridiculous. I don't know, what did that sound like on the field, Alistair? Because in the broadcast, we can obviously hear the conversation with Derek Summers, the infamous TMO legend of the MLR. You know, we heard all the conversation, but what was that like on the field? Like, what was it like in the atmosphere with the Old Glory DC supporters?
It seemed a little less controversial in the stand text because I mean, it looked held up. Like they went over and you're thinking, oh, that looks held up. That could be held up. But obviously, especially in New York Stadium, you know, there's a track around it. You're minimum 20 meters from the sideline, much less the action where the score is happening. And so it was kind of hard to tell what exactly was going on. And then they overturned it and you're like, come on, boo. But you're also a fan in the stands. Like you're always going to boo a decision that doesn't go your way. It doesn't matter whether it was right. And it was only watching the highlight afterwards that I was like, oh wow, yeah, no, that really shouldn't have been a try, should it?
Yeah, and it's funny because you hear the whistle too. right? And I think I could
Yeah.
hear an Old Glory DC. I could hear, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Kurt Baker
It
or
was
if it was
probably
another
Kurt
guy.
Baker. He
But
was angry.
you could hear one of the guys say, "The whistle went though." You heard the whistle, right? And you could, like, when you're watching the replay, and I was watching the replay earlier today, and you literally see Dylan Fawcett in the try zone, has the ball up, whistle goes, and then you can see him place the ball down. I'm not sure if TMO just didn't take that into account. Pretty tough.
I mean, but this is, and I've spoke about this before, and like this is where the TMO and I'm not going to go too much on this rant. I know I love ranting, but I'm not going to go on a rant here. But it's just like that's why these protocols and guidelines need to be consistent and understood across all referees. You know, the ref, and I always forget his name. You just said his name, Alistair, but I already forgot it. Apologies. But
And
you know, yes, exactly, him. But he specifically asks and says, "Was the ball grounded before I blew my whistle?" And Derek Summers responds and says, "I clearly see a grounding. That's it." And I'm like, you have 6 angles to watch this. I get it. You're trying to talk through your cell phone with a headset on, but you can still look at the TV screen and understand when the whistle blew and when the ball was grounded. So it was just, I mean, you didn't see that, Alistair, but I watched that whole thing happen live, and I was just like, this is ridiculous. But kind of silver lining, I think that's what really fired the Jets in the Old Glory DC team, because after that, they were physical on defense. They were, you know, breaking the line. They were a threat on offense, and really having, while they were under pressure from New York, because New York was in their half for quite a bit. I mean, they weren't giving up an inch, and they were strong on defense, and it just led to a really strong rest of that second half for them.
Yeah, I was very impressed with the defense, and I think Old Glory was the better team when they were focused and when they were sort of in the right mental state to be playing properly. And I think that's the key for DC. They can't really afford to not be firing at 100% all game. And that's going to be a challenge against New England, because New England's a better team than New York is. And we survived against New York in those stretches where our heads just weren't in it, and where we just couldn't quite focus, and we were letting them do whatever they wanted. And it's going to be the challenge against New England, is just keep focused the whole time and keep up that energy.
Yeah, because I think that's the big difference. Obviously, we'll get into your thoughts on that matchup with the New England Free Jacks, but I think this game was very reminiscent of how New York's season has gone all year long. You know, and they've been a very high-low type team here. There's some times where they look like the former MLR champions, and then there are times where they just didn't look like they were able to put things together. And I think those lulls also help, obviously, Old Glory DC, when you're going through those stretches, to kind of keep up there and be able to do that. New England's not going to be a team that does that. They've been firing on all cylinders since week 1, apparently, and it'll be interesting to see that. I guess last question for you, Alistair, before we move on to your preview, or our preview of this New England Free Jacks matchup with Old Glory DC. In this match, when were you finally able to kind of take a breath? Was it when Tusitala finally offloaded it to Kurt Baker, who ran it down the sideline, and you're like, okay, finally Old Glory DC is going to their first ever conference final and their first appearance in the playoffs?
Or was it when Kurt Baker turned around and like pretended to show the ball to I forget who was chasing him? Or was it after he's tried and threw the 2 thumbs up and started running off like a madman?
The 2 thumbs up was a great moment, and he got a lot of flack for showing the ball to his opponent. But honestly, I've rewatched it. It was nothing, guys. Come on.
And I mean,
the dude just scored the nail in a coffin try in a playoff match. Like, let him be excited.
First ever Old Glory DC.
Yeah, first ever Old Glory DC
playoff win. So
it just shows it meant something to the guy. So get off his back. But it was that try. That moment, you're just like, oh yeah, they're done. They're good. But to be honest, even before that, they felt like they were going to win. And as soon as the subs came on, they got in their fresh legs, and it just looks different. Whole game looks different. They're like, yeah, they've really got this.
Yeah.
Bus is rowdy going home, Alistair?
Yes. Fair few intoxicated folk on that bus, I would definitely say.
Well, Old Glory DC does it right.
I'd expect no less in what you would argue as, I would say, the biggest up to this point. The book has still needs to be written. Obviously, they got a big time match against New England Free Jacks this coming weekend. But hey, biggest moment in franchise history up to this point was this
And
past
it's going to
weekend.
come to an
So
abrupt stop.
no, we'll see. Well, let's talk about it. We're gonna move on quickly here. Alistair, Matt and I are gonna get into a preview of this matchup, but just as we have you on here, a quick little prediction. I know it's a tough one for you to put on the spot. New England Free Jacks been tearing it up all season long. Some people argue that they are the best team in the MLR. I know there's a lot of talk with San Diego, but at least from a whole team standpoint, I mean, this team can play defense. They know how to score tries, and Old Glory DC definitely has a tall task ahead of them. Kind of your thoughts heading into it as an Old Glory DC fan and what you expect from this matchup against New England.
Yeah, the thing that I take confidence in is we darn near beat this team in I think it was week 3 or something like that. Early on in the season, we really close games, and a little more TMO controversy in that one where we probably should have won that game. And really since then, I mean, they've won 14 games, and you can't get around that fact. But
Sure.
at the same time, they haven't looked that impressive at all times in it. They've had some real ropey games in there, and they make a lot of mistakes. So I think if Old Glory is playing at their top level, if they can keep focused for the whole game, they've got a real shot here. If they lose focus too much and they just let New England score in those moments and get some tries there, then it's going to be really hard for them to pull back. But I wouldn't count Old Glory out. I think it's not an impossibility.
Now, sounds like, in your heart, Alistair, sounds like you really believe Old Glory DC can do it, but in your head, you know the stats, you know the facts, and you know what's really going to happen this week.
I've plugged it into the computer. I've got the computer model, and it's telling me that there's an 86% chance that New England wins. But you know what? 14% is not zero.
You're telling me there's a chance. That's all you got to think about.
And
you know what? I'm going to be going if I can. If there's another bus, I'm going to be there, and you better believe I will be cheering, and I will believe in my heart that we can win until the final whistle goes.
Yeah, and there's no way that we're going to get the co-host of the Glorious Rugby podcast, the man himself who runs the Glorious Rugby website, to even have an inkling or have any lack of confidence in his Old Glory DC side as they head into their first conference championship final, which is pretty exciting stuff. But Alistair, again, man, I don't think I'll take the time as just before we let you go to just really thank you for all that you've done here for the Fantasy Ruckers. When it comes to we talked about the website, when it comes to all your expertise there and what you've done for Fantasy MLR as we continue to try to work again to make this thing a reality. It was just incredible. And then to have your kind of expertise in that just enhanced it for everyone, not only for allowing me to live more of a healthier lifestyle, like I mentioned, and have a few more hours on the weekend to not be staring at an Excel sheet and be crunching numbers. But I think even for our league members like Maddie here, in the way that it just enhanced the experience for him. So I think I say for all of us, as with the league members and the commissioner himself, saying thank you for all that you've done. And I think me especially, I'm very excited to work with you moving forward here to continue making this better, and then eventually, hopefully, open this up to as many people as possible who can also then enjoy how fun Fantasy MLR can be.
Yeah, it's been a great journey, and it's been fun to work with all of you guys. I'm looking forward to next year.
We shall see it. All right. And then last final thing, if you aren't already, make sure you're checking out the stuff that Alistair does outside. He's not all the time on the fantasyruckers.com. He's got some other stuff going on. We mentioned the Glorious Rugby podcast. He hosts that with the co-host the runner of Rugby Morning, co-hosting the Glorious Rugby podcast with him, John Fitzpatrick. Obviously, we had him on the show a couple weeks ago when it was a build-up to the final. He was our finalist, Matt, taking him down. But nonetheless, does that podcast. Great stuff. So make sure you go check that out on Apple Podcasts as well. And then go check out Alistair's site as well, gloriousrugby.com. If you're an Old Glory DC fan, you'll love the content that he's putting up there. Anything else that I missed, Alistair, that you're doing these days? I feel like you got a whole bunch of hands in different cookie jars that it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah, the only other thing is tackle the numbers. Tackle the numbers.gloriousrugby.com, which is I've been forgetting to update recently. It's been one too many things, but I'll get the most recent numbers up there soon. That's where I run my computer model that makes predictions for all of the matches, and this year surprisingly accurate, about over 80% correct, picking winners. So just saying.
Impressive. That's impressive. And hey, I'll throw in another plug. If you ever see an all bald gentleman lurking around on the Reddits, you know who it is.
That's true. Absolutely. I'm at Alistair KP on Twitter, but /oddballgentleman on Reddit. That's really my haven.
Yeah, definitely go give him a follow for sure. It's been a lot of fun watching all the stuff that you've been doing. But Alistair, appreciate you as always. We'll get back to work here during this off season. Again, we're going to try to make this thing opened up to as many people as possible here moving forward. But again, can't thank you enough for all that you've done for us, man. Really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks again to Alistair Kirsch-Poole for joining us here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Again, I can't thank him enough for all the great stuff that he's done for the Fantasy Ruckers and all the hard work. And again, I mentioned it during our interview, just super excited to work with him this offseason to hopefully bring Fantasy MLR to even more people out there.
Yeah, and hey, I said it to him. I said him in my compliment or question, however you want to take it. But Alistair is truly the champion of the Fantasy Rucker League with all the work he did this season.
Yeah,
and he's going to continue to do, apparently, because the guy loves it. So, so yeah, something to look forward to, something for the people to look forward to. He's a man of the people. We love to see it, and I mean, it seems like we're just gonna reap the benefits and rewards of this guy's big brain.
I mean, I wasn't lying. I don't know, and I don't want to make John Fitzpatrick of Rugby Morning jealous, because I know that they are co-hosts.
Alistair's the way better half of that Glorious Rugby podcast.
Sure. Right? But I guess what
Alistair's the way better. Hey, Fitzy, he's way better half.
What I'm alluding to is I think, and I wasn't gonna say this to person, because I didn't want things to move too fast, but I think we're a match made in heaven. I bring the fantasy rugby stuff to the table. He brings the website developing stuff to the table. We've created a beautiful thing here.
Yeah.
The fantasyruckers.com. Don't want to make John Fitzpatrick jealous, like I said, but I don't know. I think Alistair and I have a pretty good working relationship. But all right, let's move on here. Again, we broke down that Old Glory DC New York game with Alistair there. Obviously, again, he's a big time Old Glory DC fan. So let's shift on over here now, Matt, to obviously the other playoff matchup that happened over the weekend. The Seattle Seawolves beating the Houston SaberCats 37-26, and it was kind of a up and down matchup. I mean, at one point, Seattle Seawolves really seemed like they were going to be running away with things coming out of the second half. Houston really clawing their way back, pun intended, and it looked like it was going to get a little bit dicey there for the Seattle Seawolves, but then Seattle ultimately ending up solidifying the victory there and booking their ticket into the Western Conference Final.
I mean, yeah, Houston kept it tight, throughout the first half. They really were in there, and honestly, they looked like they could keep it a close game and possibly pull out a win, even with the injuries that they had to some of the key players like Drew Wild. But I mean, the fact that AJ Alateam was kind of able to keep them in the game at the start of that first half with his boot, Houston started coming back. But in my opinion, honestly, Houston just kind of just threw it away. I think they were trying to force things. Dom Makina doing the double move to get over the line. Honestly, like, he could have just recycled the ball and kind of kept moving on. They got a little bit too greedy trying to get that try when they just had to be patient. They had tons of time at that point. But I think that just shows the difference between an experienced playoff team like the Seattle Seawolves versus a Houston SaberCats team that, hasn't had much experience in that playoff.
Yeah, and I mean, it was cool to see, obviously, from a fantasy perspective, that one of the storylines that we'll obviously discuss throughout the offseason, definitely heading into the next year.
Took to get back on the field.
We'll get to that. Is I guess the conversation between Jordan Chait and AJ Alatimu, and seeing AJ Alatimu have the impact that he had in this one, obviously a key contributor to why Seattle was able to come away with the victory, hitting 3 key penalty kicks, converting all of his conversions. A really, really well done performance. And yeah, like you alluded to there, Matt, Reichert Hadding, despite what you may think there, Matt, in your opinions of Seattle's 8-man, Came back, made a big impact for the Seattle Seawolves.
Yeah, he did make a big impact. And maybe we know why.
That's always gonna be your analysis of it.
This is gonna loom over Riker. I'm sorry. I mean, he's a great player. Steroids or not, needles or not, he's a great player. And he makes a difference. The fact that he was able to come back from a surgery is crazy, but they did state this timeline that he'd be back for the playoffs. Moving on from that, because I don't want to speak too much on that. AJ Alatimu, though, I think Seattle Seawolves, at the end of the day, they got to fall back on their veteran, their well-tested, tried and true, tested, whatever the saying is, veteran, to be in that 10 position and really control the game for them.
Absolutely. All right. And I think now overlooking over the weekend of rugby that we had, Matt, you think these are the two best teams that are coming out of this first round to take on, you would argue, obviously, the two best teams left in Major League Rugby. You got Old Glory DC taking on New England Free Jacks now, and the Seattle Seawolves taking on the San Diego Legion.
I know Alistair was saying how Old Glory was the better team on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I think New York ran into some injuries at a bad time.
Yeah.
They never got Hayden back. Emery left the game early. They didn't have Cole in the lineup, who honestly is probably one of the biggest impact players on that Rugby New York team. Out of all the stars that they have, Cole makes the biggest impact in that back three for sure. So I personally think that New York should be here. I think New York kind of blew it. Old Glory DC deserved that win, but I think the New York New England Free Jack matchup would have been one that I would have enjoyed. With this, I think Alistair has said that they beat him in week 3, but that New England team has been a completely different team since week 3 and how they finished the season. Regarding Seattle, I mean, yeah, Seattle, San Diego.
This is going to be the matchup.
Yeah, it's going to be an unreal matchup. We saw them play the last game of the year. We saw the lineup that Seattle put out. That's not the lineup that's going to be out this weekend. So I'm excited to see that one. I think that one's going to be close. I think it's going to be physical. And I think it's going to be full of points.
Yeah, it should be interesting. All right, so let's kind of shift now this conversation to, I guess, a fantasy conversation, because this is the Fantasy Ruckers show, and obviously we do have the Fantasy Ruckers League playoff challenge that we got to talk about.
MLR playoff challenge.
There you go. So I guess in terms of how you're approaching this weekend, when it comes to the Fantasy Ruckers playoff challenge, how do you approach this? You got 4 teams you can choose from: Old Glory DC, New England Free Jacks, San Diego Legion, Seattle Seawolves. For me, and I'll start with this. I think my key thing here is I want guys that I think are going to be on teams that will make it to the final.
Taking my strategy from last year.
Is that what you're about to say? Because I think that's what I want. Now, we did see last playoff challenge that may not be necessarily the case, because you have a guy that has a huge performance in this semifinal, could set you up good for the rest of the playoff challenge. But I think with the difference in scoring now, how there's now more of a likelihood that players will be scoring points in both matches and not putting up a goose egg in one of these, I think that at least is one of the most important things. I got to pick who I think is going to make the final first, and then choose players from those sides that are going to be in my squad.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, that's the route that I went last year. That's the route you go with. Who's gonna be playing the most number of games for the rest of the playoffs. That means they're gonna have more opportunity to get you simple things like meters gained, tackles. We're not even talking about tries. Meters gained, tackles, minutes played. 70 or 80 minutes. That's the name of the game. You're trying to make sure that you are getting points throughout these playoff challenge, and I think that's the way to do it. For me, I think the biggest thing to balance with these 4 teams being left is that these 4 teams have a lot of quality talent that really were high-scoring guys all throughout the season, right? I mean, look at guys like Sam Malolo, Nick Sushon, Peter Malcolm, Mil Sanarivi. That's the top hookers, top front row for all 4 teams.
Yeah.
All costing $5.
Yeah.
Are you going to spend that amount on them? Are you going to look for somebody else? Maybe a guy who is going to come on in the second half. Maybe a guy that was injured for some of the season and is now making a playoff impact. Same thing goes with some of the other positions. I think these are the decisions that we're really going to see some variation between team owners. You can be a team owner for the playoffs, team owners. So it'll be really interesting, I think, in that sense, because you are not going to be able to have the luxury of being able to choose top guys from every team with this budget.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And at the time, when we release this episode, you should be able to see on our socials the spreadsheet on there with all the values, so you'll be able to kind of break this down. I guess that leads to the question when you're talking about values there, Matt. I think there's a wide range of ways you can go, right? You can pick your explosive, kind of have an average team across the board, pick some $3, $4 guys, throw in a $2 guy here and there, or how necessary is it for you think the winning playoff challenge lineup to have one of these big heavy hitter $5 guys in their lineup?
Back three center need a $5 guy. You're getting a $5 guy. Get him. Get one you can trust. Get a guy that you know is going to put up points. Guys like Oxberger, guys like Foodie, Dan Creel, Balakena, all these guys are guys you know are going to put up points. Yeah. That is your base. You know you're going to get that. Next position you look at, second row, back row. Get a guy in that position that can put up some points. Whether that's $5, whether that's $4, you're looking there for salary. You'll spend your salary there. Front row, scrum half, fly half. These to me are the positions that you can afford to spend on a cheaper guy. You look at guys like Josh Henderson, $2. Is he going to start for San Diego? Is Will Hooley going to start? I don't know. But, that could be a good way to spend your money on someone that's cheaper who you can still trust to potentially get some points at the 10 position. The front row, don't even touch the starting hookers. Look for an alternative. Look for a guy coming off the bench. Is it Andrew Quattrin that you're going to take a shot on? Yeah, he's $4, but less than $5. Is it, is it somebody else? Is it just looking down the list? I think front row is going to where you're kind of going to have to just throw a bone out there and see what you can get. But the way that I'm going about it, and if you want to win, I would probably use my strategy. Just saying. That's how I'm going about it.
Now, I guess
spend your money in those two positions.
How much does kicking go into this kind of factor? Because obviously you'll designate your one kicker, and most likely it's going to be obviously in that scrum half, fly half position. And I mean, you pick a guy like AJ Alatimu, who's valued at $4. If he has another game like he had against the Houston SaberCats, that's big time points there.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, it is playoffs. So when we look at playoffs, there's going to be more penalty kicks, tighter games, a lot more on the line. So you know that there's going to be more penalty kicks. So yeah, definitely a route that you can go. But I think the thing is that you got to give up somewhere. If you're going to go a 5 and a 5 and in scrum half, fly half, and center back 3, then look, back row and front row, fine. Can those. But I think you don't balance out all 4 positions. You don't attempt to do that. You stack up on 2 positions and you leave, $5 left to cover the next 2 positions.
Gotcha.
Or, well, there's 3 other more positions. So you leave $5 left to cover 3.
Yeah.
Or you spend 5 and 4. It's tough. That's why it's the
that's why it's
TFR
a challenge.
MLR, playoff challenge. It's not
true.
TFR MLR playoff, easy breezy beautiful challenge. It's a challenge.
That's a good one.
So nice. You got to figure it out.
Man, you should not be in charge of naming things.
No, but it is hashtag TFR MLR playoff challenge. That is the hashtag.
All right. So with that in mind, with those strategies in mind, we're very excited to see some of these lineups that you guys come out with. Again, have a look out for our social channels where the spreadsheet will be posted. It'll also be posted in our Discord community, and then you are going to then send us your lineup on Twitter, tag us at Fantasy Ruckers, and use the hashtag TFR MLR playoff challenge, and we'll get those all submitted, and then we will then keep track of who is how people are doing throughout their points over the next 2 weeks, and then see who will be crowning as our 2023 TFR MLR playoff challenge. So it should be interesting. All right, before we wrap up the show, Matt, obviously we talked about the preview of these matches, but I think it's time to give our predictions.
We stink at these. We stunk at these all season.
Yeah, we did.
Whoever we choose is going to lose.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe you're,
Right.
you're listen out. We need Alistair's computer model
Yes.
on this one, and with that 86% win or like correct rate that he's having, a whole lot better than us. Computers.
Yeah, he said on the interview he makes picks with his heart or his head, but I make picks with the thing I'm sitting on constantly.
Is that so?
They all come out of there.
A whole bunch of poop. A
Yeah.
whole bunch of poop. All right. Well, let's talk about first one. I think the easiest one out of the bunch. Old Glory DC, traveling to New England to take on the Free Jacks. I think this one's pretty
Said it-
straightforward.
I said it to his face. Look, if you're picking Old Glory DC to win, you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
You're lying to yourself. It's New England Free Jacks. Look, their team's just way too good for this Old Glory DC squad.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And that's why in this TFR playoff challenge, might be looking at a few New England Free Jacks guys here because I am confident that they will be making an appearance in the final, and a lot of those guys are heavy hitters in that too. So it's pretty interesting. All right, the tough one, the real tough one. I think this is going to be outside of what the final is expected to be. I think if New England makes it to the final, this is going to be a very good one for whoever wins this matchup. But this might be one of the best matchups of the year, or definitely going to be one of the best matchups of the year. The Seawolves taking on the San Diego Legion in San Diego. I don't know, man. I got to let you go for it. I got to think about this one for a bit, but it's
Look.
going to be an interesting one.
I gotta back my boys. They're not my boys, but they had the boys that I was rooting for. They had my boys Richard Judd, had my boys Nate Oxberger. So look, I'm going San Diego Legion. I think this is going to be a tough one, tight one, for sure. I think it's going to come down to penalty kicks or a try difference, under a try difference. But San Diego Legion, they're at home. We know the San Diego Legion faithful is going to come out strong. And the San Diego Legion side, they're a strong side, and I want to see them take this win.
And how much do you put into play the week break that the San Diego Legion have had?
I mean, like when you look at Old Glory DC, for example, they came on. That was a physical game. I honestly think that this is kind of a benefit for San Diego Legion. Seattle Seals, they also they came off a physical game as well, and I think it could show. So we'll have to see what that looks like. I genuinely think that for these top tier teams, a week off is going to be something that they can use to their advantage.
Yeah, I think week off at home. Man, I'm having a hard time picking against the Seattle Seawolves team because we've seen them do it before. I mean, they're just an experience. You mentioned it earlier in the breakdown. They're an experienced playoff team, and they know how to come away with these victories. You've seen it in the past, but this San Diego Legion team is just too exciting. So I think I'm gonna have to side with the San Diego Legion as well, which would be interesting. We might as well make a final prediction here. If it is New England Free Jacks versus the San Diego Legion, who are you going with?
San Diego Legion.
You're with the Legion. I think
going with the Legion.
I think New England might come out with that one. I don't know. I'm really defense, man. Their defense is incredible. But we'll get to it next episode. But nonetheless, should be an interesting weekend and a fascinating weekend of really good rugby. It's gonna be a lot of fun to watch. And again, make sure you submit your Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge lineups. Deadline for that is ahead of the kickoff of the first match, which let me pull up here. Quickly.
5:30.
It's going to be 5:30 on Saturday on Canada Day, July 1st. Make sure you're submitting your lineups before then, and get them to us on Twitter by tagging us and using the hashtag TFR MLR Playoff Challenge.
Pro tip, with that in mind, maybe wait till some lineups are put out before jumping the gun. All right, don't be silly. But
that's some good advice.
Hashtag TFR MLR Playoff Challenge.
There you go. All right, Matt, any final words for the people there? This might be your last time to kind of bask in the championship sun, or are you going to milk that all?
Oh, no, we still got the TFR MLR Playoff Challenge championship for me to win. But look, I mean, good luck to the people joining, to the new people that haven't done this yet. Sorry about it early for beating you already. But good luck. And happy that you're getting a taste of fantasy rugby. And welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers FTR MLR Playoff Challenge.
Nice. That was a good one. All right. Well, thanks again to Alistair Kirsch.
TFR MLR Playoff Challenge.
Again,
dang.
so good at making names. It's fantastic. Thanks again to Alistair Kirsch-Poole for joining us on the show. Again, can't thank him enough for all that he's done. Check out the fantasyruckers.com. It's really a great site to digest a whole bunch of information, both fantasy and just statistical wise when it comes to Major League Rugby. And again, it's going to be a super exciting weekend of conference championship finals here in the MLR. With that being said, for Matt Yee, I'm Ryan Yee. We'll be back next. We'll be back next week. It's been a rough show. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Stay tuned. We'll keep you updated with the Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge, and we'll see you then.
Ryan's gone crazy, ladies and gentlemen.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.